Let's now take a look at Saturn 2, which is FabFilter's multi-band distortion unit and sound mangler. So we're looking at the default setting here. Of course, you can click over here and load any of these wild presets. There's a lot of options over here to mess with. But I'm going to start with the default setting so I can explain how this plugin works. So we're looking at this one unit over here. This blank area over here is where you can potentially split the audio into different frequency bands and process them independently. We'll save that for a later tutorial. For now, let's look at the main controls here. Now, first, let me just play a bit of the original signal that's going through. This is the bypass button, so we can turn it off here and hear the clean signal. I'll unbypass it. We see the beautiful spectrum analyzer in the background there. Now we can also turn off this processor by clicking this button here. We still get the analyzer, but we don't get any processing. There's a mix control, so we can blend in the distortion or saturation with the clean signal if you want to get a bit of a subtle or a parallel processing effect. I'm going to leave it at 100. Now let's jump ahead to the drive control, because that is clearly the most fun control and obviously also the biggest control we're seeing over here. So before we do that, let's talk a bit about the different modes we have here, or the different algorithms for saturation. And as you can see, there are tons and tons of options. So I don't know which one to start with. Let's go with maybe clean tube. All right, let's crank up the drive. There we go, starting to hear that. You should also notice the visual tonal color change a bit. It's getting a bit reddish. And the more I crank that up, the more red it gets, and the more we're hearing that saturation. Now, like I said, I can bring the mix back down, so you can blend in the clean sound with that saturated signal. Now, I could spend hours here showing you all the different modes, but I would leave that to you. Explore the different distortion algorithms. For now, I'm just going to pick a different one. Let's try broken tube. Now, this is clearly a lot more aggressive because at that 50% mark, we're already getting a lot of saturation. But just for fun, let's see how far I can go. Pretty wild. Now we also have tonal control over here. So think of it like a 4-band EQ. Kind of like on an amplifier. So I can adjust the bass, mids, treble, and also presence. Now we have a very convenient one knob compressor. So if I increase this, I'm gradually adding in compression. Now it is a program dependent compressor, so it's going to react to the incoming audio. See, like heavy compression there. I'm going to tone down the distortion. It's getting a bit too aggressive. And now you can even hear the compression in effect. That sounds pretty nice. Now we can do the opposite. We can expand the signal by moving this knob into the negative. Listen to that. So the quiet signals are quieter and the loud signals are even louder. I'm not getting too much presence. Might be because of the original signal coming in or even the saturation. This is just a level control here. Now, if you're curious about the ring around the knob here, this is your panner, but specifically, it's a panner for the distortion. So when I move this to the left, I'm distorting the left signal, which is pretty interesting. And I can also choose to distort the right side instead. Versus this panner is an actual panner. So if I pan this to the left, we're just hearing the signal on the left. If I move this to the right, we're just hearing the right signal. Now if I set the distortion all the way to the left, we're not really hearing that much distortion. And that's kind of obvious because we're mainly distorting the left signal and we're listening to the right signal. And now we hear it. Pretty interesting how you can do that, especially if you have a stereo signal. You can have some really interesting stereo distortion processing. Now after you've messed around with all these controls, you can choose to save it. Of course, you can save the entire preset, but you can also just save this one module. And there are already presets over here. I'm going to save these two controls for later, the feedback and frequency control. And this will also relate to some of the controls here. There's a feedback button over here. And before we wrap up this particular video, I just want to quickly talk about some other controls. MIDI learn, that's kind of self-explanatory. So if I would like to MIDI map this to a particular knob on my MIDI controller, I can just click and MIDI learn it. There's also a linear phase option. This will make more sense when we split the audio into different bands. We'll come back to that later. High quality, there's actually two different modes, good and superb. At good, we get 8 times oversampling, and in superb, we get 32 times oversampling. So be a bit careful, this is definitely going to hit your CPU a bit. I've already talked about the bypass button, so that turns off the entire processing, including the spectrum analyzer. And then here we have some basic controls. We'll come back to this, but it's fairly straightforward. Input gain, output gain.